Good evening, folks. Welcome to my sixth live reading. Uh, when I did the first one, I certainly wasn't expecting to be doing six. But anyway, tonight you can be in with a chance for winning the anthology that these stories are in. The anthology is Scary Snippets Sibling Edition, another tongue twister. Um, and I've got three stories in that. Karma Has Teeth, The Vigil, and The Thing in the Shed. Now it's a bit unusual because it's three pieces of flash fiction, but they're all interlinked. Hence why I'm doing the whole kit and caboodle. Now, to be in with a chance of winning the paperback of the sibling edition of Scary Snippets, I want you to answer a question. Now, the question that I want you to answer this time is, what would you, the viewers, want me, the writer type person here, what would you like me to write about next? I know I'm opening myself up for some really kind of silly answers here, but brilliant. Bring it on. Yeah, all you have to do to win, just tell me what you'd like me to write about next or in the future. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kick straight off with what I like to call the Jack and Elsie cycle, with part one. Karma Has Teeth. Everybody in town knew my Aunt Elsie. If not by name, then definitely by sight. She had a shock of white tufty hair and a hunched gait that suggested to some of the more superstitious types that she was a witch. This had a twofold effect. Firstly, the kids at school teased me for having a witch in the family, and secondly, if their teasing got too much to bear, I could ward them off with threats that Elsie would turn them into toads. Nobody at school wanted to be a toad. One Easter, I'd been left with my Auntie Elsie and Uncle Jack, while my parents were gallivanting around Europe, ostensibly for work, but we all knew that it was a thinly veiled holiday. I wasn't too put out by this, as I found Jack and Elsie to be interesting and fun. I'd been having a nice couple of weeks, but one afternoon, things took a decidedly darker turn. I hated PE with a passion, and would go to extreme lengths to avoid slipping on those hideous nylon shorts. That day was scheduled to be the dreaded cross-country run, and it was currently hammering it down with icy rain and blowing a gale. I had absolutely no desire to compete. Time had been running out, so I fell back on an old favourite, the fingers down the throat routine. It worked a treat. I was sent home. At first, I didn't think anybody was in. The curtains were drawn, and no light was visible through the crack. I put my key in the lock and let myself in. As I stepped inside and kicked off my shoes, I was immediately hit by a strange smell. It stank like the festering swamp behind the River Camel, mingled with something altogether worse. It smelled like an abattoir. Through the living room door, I could hear my auntie. She was chanting in an unidentifiable language. It was a jumble of guttural syllables and high-pitched ululations. As fear crept down my spine and sent shivers along my arms, I cautiously opened the door and pushed it slowly ajar. "Auntie!" I yelped as I took in the scene. The floor was covered in a plastic sheet, and the kitchen table stood in the centre, with thick black candles flickering on top. Auntie Elsie was clad in a strange crimson robe, and held a struggling chicken by the neck in one hand and a black, wavy dagger in the other. A bucket brimmed with blood next to a pile of twitching avian corpses. Elsie's head snapped in my direction. "Tony!" she barked, her eyes burning from under the hood. Her face was contorted into a mask of surprise, anger, and guilt. She stopped chanting, and her grip on the unfortunate fowl faltered. It struggled free in a plume of feathers and started racing around the room, clucking furiously. "Grab the chicken!" she shrieked. "It has to be 13. The tribute demands 13, or they will come for me." "What's going on?" I asked in shocked tones. My feet felt like it had taken root. "Who's they?" "No time to explain," she panted as she chased the chicken out into the kitchen. "Help me catch the chicken." There was no way in hell that I was going to be a party to the ritual slaughter of poultry. I moved my mouth to argue, but no sound would come out. My mouth had turned dry with terror, and my tongue felt sticky and swollen. I tried to swallow, but my throat wouldn't comply. Fear had struck me dumb. As I stood frozen in horror, the chicken burst from the kitchen and hurtled in my direction. I screamed and dived out of the way. My left shoe connected with the tin pail, and it tipped over, splashing sticky, warm blood all over the plastic sheet. It ran in rivers and pooled around the table legs. "No!" my auntie screamed. "Get out before it's too late." Before I could ask her what she meant, the cat flap clattered furiously. As I backed towards the door, followed by the petrified chicken, a line of large, warty toads came hopping into the room. "Run!" Elsie screamed. I turned to flee, but the chicken was between me and the door. I couldn't get the door open. As I tried to move the chicken aside, one of the toads leapt across the room and clamped its mouth over the chicken's head. It was then that I noticed that these toads had teeth, rows and rows of nasty pointy teeth. With a disgusting snap, the toad bit off the chicken's head and swallowed it in one gulp. As the headless body clattered around the room, I turned and saw the rest of the horde advancing on my auntie with evil intentions. "Go!" she demanded. "It's me they want." "Why? What did you do?" I asked as I fumbled with the door. "They haven't always been toads." She swiped at the toads with the dagger. It was no good. They would be on her in a second if I didn't act. It didn't matter what she had done. She was still my auntie. I grabbed a broom from behind the door and attacked the toads, herding them back towards the kitchen. They snapped and croaked, their evil little eyes glowing red. As I battled them, Elsie started chanting again and righted the bucket. Before I could act, she had opened her wrists and bled herself into the pail. A giant toad materialized in the air and sucked up her life fluid. I couldn't take the horror. My knees buckled and I fell into a dead faint. When I awoke, the house was back to normal except for the apparent suicide of my auntie. Uncle Jack never mentioned that day. Needless to say, the chicken dinners we had for the next month didn't go down very well. End of part 1. Okay, I'll answer questions and things like that about them at the end of all of them, and I'll also tell you about where they all come from. Right now, I'm just going to crack on with the next part. Part 2, the Vigil. Tony squirmed uncomfortably on the cold stone step. 80% of his mind was occupied by his ghoulish task, and the other 20 by praying that he wouldn't get piles. He let out a deep sigh and kicked the end of his sleeping bag with his left foot. He shouldn't have brought it. There was no way he was sleeping in the family crypt. Uncle Jack had always been something of an odd fellow. So when the grizzled octogenarian died and stipulated in his will that his nephew had to hold vigil in the night before his interment, it didn't come as the shock it probably should have. Tony had long known that his family, and Jack in particular, had some strange ideas and practices, so he just shook his head and went along with it. Sarah, Tony's wife, thought he'd gone completely nuts when he told her. She couldn't understand why he couldn't just lie about it to the solicitor. Tony tried to explain that if Jack thought there was a need for it, then there probably was. Also, Tony loved his uncle and couldn't very well refuse his dying wishes. He was family after all. You see, he wasn't just there to make sure Jack wasn't bricked up alive and kicking. He was on guard. Armed with a camping lamp, a shovel, and an aluminium baseball bat, Tony sat drinking lukewarm soup out of a battered thermos. His uncle's instructions had left him in little doubt that he was in for a rough night, but so far all he'd had to contend with was a particularly large spider. Jack had been getting steadily more and more introverted since his wife's tragic passing some years before. Tony had barely seen him in the last 6 months. Jack had taken to spending all day, every day, locked in the shed. On the one occasion Jack opened the door when he knocked, he was just sitting there staring into space. Checking the time on his mobile phone revealed that it was just before midnight. There was no signal, so he couldn't even update his social media pages to stave off the boredom. He had brought along a pile of his uncle's papers to peruse, but the tiny crabbed script had made his eyes ache. What he read so far had also made little sense. It was all paranoid rantings about bargains and debts, and he would need to put them all into chronological order to get some perspective. Tony nearly jumped out of his skin as a furtive scrabbling came from behind one of the bricked-up doorways. He chuckled nervously. Rats, yeah, just rats. He was sure at that point that it was indeed rats, but he still moved the baseball bat closer to his feet. The noise came again. This time it was louder and more defined. If it was a rat, it was a bloody big one. The wall exploded in a cloud of brick dust and cobwebs as 2 long, powerful arms burst through. Tony screamed in surprise and grabbed the bat. The creature was bipedal and hunched. Patches of bristly hair sprouted from its scabrous hide. But the worst thing about its aspect by far was the face. It was vaguely humanoid, but with a definite canine features. Huge yellow fangs dripped with foul-smelling saliva as it sprung out of the alcove on its powerful hind legs. Tony swung the bat in an upward motion and connected sharply with the creature's jaw. It flew backwards and crashed into Uncle Tony's coffin, nearly knocking it off the steps. The powerful blow had dislodged one of its teeth. The creature appeared to be unconscious. Advancing cautiously, Tony could see through the settling dust that the creature had come from a trapdoor in the previously bricked-up alcove. To make things worse, there was another creature coming out of it. Its sharp claws scratched on the nitre-stained stone as it pulled itself out. Tony grabbed a brick and threw it with all his might. The creature howled in agony as the brick slammed into its eyeball. It fell back into the hole and by the sounds of it took down some more of its fellows with it. As the creatures barked, howled and snarled in fury, the other one was starting to stir. Tony would have to deal with it. He grabbed the shovel, raised it above his head, and prepared to lop the beast's head off. "Stop!" the creature howled. Tony was taken aback. He wasn't prepared for such a bestial creature to speak. He stopped his blow in midair. "We just want our meat." The creature spoke in a series of guttural growls, but Tony was able to decipher most of it. "What?" Tony stammered. "What do you want?" The ghoul pointed at his uncle's coffin. "Our meat. He make bargain for secrets. He ask, we hungry." The implications made his head spin. It appeared that his uncle had struck a deal with the corpse eaters. But to what end? All families have secrets, but this was beyond the pale. "Give us our meat," the creature snarled. Tony could hear the others attempting to climb up once again. He didn't have time for this. Splat! The sharp edge of the shovel cut the creature's head off neatly at the neck. "You're hungry?" Tony asked as he dragged the carcass over to the hole. "Here, eat this." The sickening sounds of teeth tearing flesh announced that the creatures had no qualms about eating their own kind. Tony was nearly sick, but they didn't trouble him again. As morning broke, all was quiet. After a shower and a change of clothes, he attended Uncle Jack's funeral. He had fulfilled his obligation. He could now claim his inheritance. End of part 2. So now we skip ahead yet again, and we're going to go straight in with part 3. The Thing in the Shed. Sarah paced nervously outside of the shed. Tony had been gone for hours. Ever since they inherited his uncle's property, the shed had been off limits. Tony was always cagey when she broached the subject. She was sure he was hiding something awful, but what? When they first moved in, the shed had been locked up tighter than the Royal Mint. Tony swore that he didn't know where the key was, but one night she caught him opening the door and going inside. When she confronted him about it, he claimed that he'd only just located it. Since then, there had been things stacked in front of the door that were far too heavy for her to lift alone. She had come home early from yoga class that evening and found the barricade moved. Tony was nowhere to be seen, but there was a light around the door from the bare bulb inside. Sarah had gone into the house to stew until he returned, but he never did. It was just after midnight now, and he'd been in there for at least 4 hours. Worry had replaced anger by now. Surely he should have come out to pee or something by now. She had shouted from the back door, but got no response. Next, she had gone and pounded on the door. The next step was to break her promise and enter the shed. Tony had made a promise to keep out after he had returned from the study one night with a frantic look on his face. He told her that Uncle Jack had kept dangerous chemicals in there, and that he would arrange to have them properly disposed of. When she demanded to see inside, he had quickly cooked up the lost key story. For 2 straight weeks, he had been locked in the study with his uncle's notes. She had no idea what was in them. But from what she knew of Uncle Jack, it was probably some Olympic standard lunacy. Sarah took a deep breath and shouldered the door open. Clearly, her husband hadn't been expecting her home, or he would have used something better than a bag of compost to bar the door. She stepped into the wooden structure, and her mouth fell open in surprise. Tony was nowhere to be seen, but a large trapdoor stood open in the centre of the floor. Taking a torch off the shelf, Sarah climbed down the rickety wooden ladder. The bottom of the shaft led onto a short corridor that had been carved out of solid rock. Bettles Cove and Cornwall in general was riddled with tunnels and caves, so it was no great shock that the tunnel led to a large chamber under the house. What was unexpected, however, was that the chamber was decked out like a mad scientist's laboratory in a dodgy old horror film. Sarah gagged as the stench of chemicals and rotting meat assailed her senses. Shining the beam of the torch around the cavern, Sarah soon located the source of the noxious odour. Piles and piles of rotten chicken carcasses stood piled against one of the walls. Clang! Sarah jumped about 3 feet in the air as a metal chain clattered against the pipe it was fastened to. She spun around as something snarled and crawled at her back. Luckily, she was too far out of reach. She shone the torch in the monster's face and screamed her lungs out. Straining on the end of her leash was the ancient cadaver of an old woman with wild white hair. The zombie growled and snapped her jaws as she tried desperately to get at the warm meal in her midst. The abomination had obviously been there for years. It had made a nest of sorts out of animal remains. Sarah knocked several vials of glowing green fluid to the floor as she backed away. Looking for some kind of weapon, she found a diary in her husband's hand lying open on the bench. She picked it up and quickly scanned the contents. Uncle Jack had been inconsolable when his dearest Elsie died. He was so distraught that he made a devil's bargain with some hellish creatures that lived under the cemetery. In return for his body in death, they would give him the means to resurrect Elsie. He wasn't to know that she would come back as a flesh-eating zombie. He had tried everything he could find in his family's old magical tomes to bring her back to normal, but nothing worked. But in the end, he still couldn't bring himself to destroy her body. After his death, Jack had left instructions for Tony to kill his Aunt Elsie. Apparently he failed also. It wasn't just Jack that couldn't do harm to his own family. While she read, Elsie had lost interest and gone back to gnawing on her last meal. Sarah screamed in horror as she saw what it was. Auntie Elsie was eating her nephew. She was sinking her teeth into Tony's severed arm. Sarah recognized it from the wedding ring that still clung to a chewed finger. She screamed and screamed until her mind could take no more. Something inside her snapped, and all of the life left her eyes. Sarah started to move on a numb kind of autopilot. She grabbed a hammer from the shelf and battered Elsie's skull into oblivion. She didn't stop until it was a disgusting paste. Next, she set fire to the bodies and fled into the night, and nobody ever saw her again. Some say that she was committed. Others say that she killed herself. One old man claims that she lived in the woods in an old shack and kept chickens. One thing is for certain: a dreadful family legacy came to a merciful end that night. The end. Thank you. That was the Jack and Elsie cycle. That was 3 stories. That was Karma Has Teeth, The Vigil, and The Thing in the Shed. You can pick up said anthology by typing that in. It's getbook.at /Scary Snippets Sibling. It is in the video information below, so just click on that. But if you don't want to part with your pennies and you do want a copy of this anthology, all you've got to do is answer our question. If you could make me write a story for you, what would it be? What would you like me to write for you? Okay. Before moving on to questions, so yeah, if you haven't answered any questions or asked anything, do that now. I will tell you about the stories and how it all came about. Just a second, I just need to grab the other laptop off the floor because there's a watch party, so there's going to be questions on that as well. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, try not to drop it, Tim. I just might say this is the moment before all laptops fell off the table. It's too dark to be doing this. Go on, cursor. Where are you? Okay. Right. Hello, Chris. Harry Navarro loving this. Maximum Tim. Yep. I'm assuming, yeah, maximum. Yeah, yeah, I get that. Yeah. Cheers. Glad to like. Okay, so it doesn't look like I have any questions at the moment, but oh, there's the watch party. There's people on there, but anyway, yeah. So these three stories, I'd had an idea. You know, you get like I'm currently writing an episodic novel. It's pretty much finished. It's like two more chapters, and they're short ones to do on it. And I had an idea for an episodic short story, um, which is the Jack and Elsie cycle. And I had this idea, but I couldn't really make it work. Um, and then I saw on the Nocturnal Sirens call that they were asking for, basically there was a limit of three stories, three up to 1,000 words that would be accepted into the anthology. And I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I actually said in the email, might not be what you're after. You might not want sort of linked stuff. But my whole objective with it was to make stories, three stories that worked really well together, but you could also read them separately. And I'm quite proud of it, really. Uh, yeah, considering it's not that long material, I think it comes just under 3,000 words. But I'm very proud of it. It's yeah, to have managed to do that, I think I'm quite pleased about. Um, yeah. Also, while we're talking about the anthology, the Scary Snippets, the companion to this, there is two of this. I mean, Scary Snippets. There's a whole series of them. There's like they often do families. So there's a Valentine, not Valentine. There's a Mother's Day one and an Easter one and a Halloween one. I think I don't know. There's a load of them. But they're jam packed with some really good like up and coming horror talent, like some really good people. So it's quite a privilege to be in one of these because they seem to sell well and they seem to be a kind of a thing. So I'm really pleased about that. Yeah, but the companion piece to this Scary Snippets Family Edition, which it was all going to be, but it ended up growing out of all control and becoming two volumes. So you have the Family Edition and then the Sibling Edition. I'm in the Sibling Edition. Um, but I urge you to to check out both. If you want to check out both. Um, the one for the Sibling Edition, which I'm in, that's getbook.at /scary snippet sibling. And if you want the other one, which has some really cool like people in it, like R.C. Mulhare and David Green and people like that, some really cool writers, uh, friends, some friends of mine as well. So yeah, check it out. Uh, that's getbook.at scary snippets family. Okay, let's have a look. Ah, okay. Raven said the watch party version crashed, so I'll answer there. I would love to see you write right, the misadventures of a baby old one, mistakenly brought to a restaurant as catch of the day. Oh, oh yeah. I'm gonna do that. I actually had a silly idea about a baby night gone. You know, a bit like the ugly duckling, but like a night gaunt. Uh, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, yeah. Spawn of Cthulhu and one of them tanks you get in restaurants. Yeah. To be fair, I've done similar things with lobsters. Uh, killer lobsters. One of my favorite mainstays of horror. Killer crustaceans. You can't go wrong. Okay. Okay. The watch party seems to be working now. I think it's on a loop, and yeah. Cool. Well, I can't. Nobody seems to be asking many questions this evening. I think I've probably answered a lot of them. But before I go, uh, check out the book anyway because the artwork is superb. I really like the artwork that they've got on this, and I believe I'm right in saying this. Natalie can correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, that it's Kyle Harrison who's the mastermind behind Emerald Bay Books. If you remember from last time, Unleashed was one of his. Uh, yeah, I really like it. I think it's really cool. Uh, and that gives me a shameless plug. Just before I came on air, I got a really cool bit of news from Emerald Bay that I've been accepted into a cosmic horror anthology called Forbidden Dreams. I'm really pleased about that. Funnily enough, it's linked to the first story by certain, yeah, certain deities. One of my personal favorites, uh, the deity. Harry says, so cool how you wrote these three stories interconnected. I've never done that until today. Only Drabbles for three. Yeah, I'd like to read that. I think I don't know. It's. I really enjoyed doing it, and I'm just pleased that I managed to get it to work. It's my partner acts as my critique group and grammar Nazi and, and PA person. Make sure I don't say anything offensive. But anyway, I had to say to her, look, do these work as standalone stories? And uh, I think they do. I think they do. I mean, if you were to pick up the thing and just read the Vigil, it's a self-contained story about. Oh, that's a point when we took. I haven't mentioned the influences on that one. On the Vigil, uh, it's one of those stories that had a really stupid influence. Like it was inspired by something really ridiculous. For me, a bit like the Killer Oysters and some of the other weird stuff I have. This was from an episode of Father Ted. This came from an episode of Father Ted where Father Jack drank all the toilet duck and died again. And they had to do a vigil and he woke up. And yeah, brilliant. But I was watching that, and that's where I got the inspiration for that center bit. Uh, the thing in the shed comes from the fact that it's a very British thing to have the man of the house completely vanish for most of the day, and you'll find him in the shed, like listening to the radio. I think it's the old phrase, "An Englishman's home is his castle." It's not. An Englishman's shed is his castle. I mean, some of the best inventions that we Brits have ever come up with have been devised in a shed, and that's a fact. But there's also something quite sinister about the old guy who's always down the bottom of the garden peering out the window. You never know what he's might be planning to eviscerate you with a garden hoe or something. You never know. You never know. Thank you, and thank you everybody who said they enjoyed that. Uh, I'm gonna head off mainly because it's really ridiculously hot and nobody else. Plus, apologies if I was sniffing quite a bit. It's not the coronavirus; it's just the pollen is really, really bad. It's seriously, I'm getting beaten up by pollen. Um, yeah, thank you all for tuning in. I haven't got anything else planned as yet, but any any publisher out there I've got a story with, if you want me to read something in your thing, just let me know. I'll have something figured out soon anyway. But again, thank you for tuning in. And if you want to pick up the anthology, oh yeah, right. If you want to win it, like free, just just tell me. what you would like me to write in an ideal world. Be as daft as you like. You know, it can be about killer parsnips if you want. Or I see Jax is on there, so it could be killer leeks, you know, or pudding stones even. Anything. The more ridiculous, the better. Go for it. Uh, yeah. One last time. That's all from Scary Snippets Sibling Edition. Getbook.at / Scary Snippets Sibling. Thank you very much for tuning in. I enjoyed that, and it went a lot better than I was expecting. So thank you very much. Take care.